Welcome to the Unlist. Question that sometimes gets asked to me. Seems pretty obvious, but can men wear floral fragrances? And the answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, there are many men's fragrances that are much more floral than you may actually realize. And so this video, Men's Florals, is dedicated to a assortment of men's fragrances throughout time that are much more floral than you may think they are and are quite nice. So by and large, men's florals as a genre really sort of, I want to say, almost predated all the other genres like fougères, citrus, aromatic, chypris, all that stuff. Because way back when men first started really toying around with the idea of dedicated fragrance, we're talking the mid to late 19th century. Prior to that, it was not super common for men to wear perfume. Colognes were not considered perfume then. They were considered hygienic. So you splash them on either to stretch the time between bathing or to freshen up, right? Again, hygiene. But to wear a scent for ostentatious reasons, to carry scent, right? Not a lot of men did that. But that began to change. In the mid to late 19th century, it was becoming more popular for men, not just rich men or ennobled men or men otherwise in high places who would want to wear fragrance to stand out from the unwashed masses, from the common rabble, from the small folk, right? So we still live in a world much like that, even though we don't like to admit it. We've just replaced nobles and aristocrats with billionaires and business moguls and what have you not, celebrities, athletes. They are the aristocracy of our current age. And trust me, when they wear perfume, everyone notices, right? So, men's florals. Some of the earliest examples come from some of the least likely places that you might think you would see a men's floral fragrance, but let's take a look at them, shall we? Here we go. So, a little iffy on years, so I'm going to look that up real quick on my computer. I am not a endless well of knowledge. Sometimes I do have to look up things myself. So I am doing that right here on camera and getting the years all ready for you. There we go. Okay, so first of these is one of my favorite fragrances, actually. I've got several bottles of it for that reason. And it is Caswell Massey Jockey Club. Now, they say that this fragrance came out in 1840. Here it is. This is the original gold cap formula of it, not the more expensive Heritage Edition, which is a different fragrance, actually. It's more of a inspired by formula. But this is the descendant of the original. And, well, the thing about this is a very musky and somewhat powdery, a little bit indolic floral fragrance that they used to describe way back when this came out. They described this as being racy. So racy, a little bit scandalous, a little bit oversexed, right? But I guess it was for 1840. Now, the thing that makes this fragrance kind of special and cool, I suppose, is that, you know, there was a certain trope, if you will, the jockey club trope, that actually started in the United Kingdom first and then filtered its way over to the United States. But you can look at the jockey club fragrance as like the antique predecessor of the sport fragrance, right? It was very popular for rich, powerful men to go to these gentlemen's clubs. And a lot of times they were based around horse racing, right? Betting on the horses, owning horses, getting jockeys to ride your horses for you, setting up, smoking your cigars, drinking your bourbon, doing your rich person thing in the jockey club. And a lot of times those clubs would also have big communal showers where they would go and shave and shower and sit and listen to the early Edison cylinders or whatever, you know, that whole thing. And these were very famous, popular fragrances, and a lot of houses back then made their own take on it. Unfortunately, just about every single version of a jockey club fragrance that we've ever seen is gone, except for this one from this American brand. So here it is. You are definitely going to need to have a tolerance for animalic floral fragrances. This is going to throw some people for a loop, but there's lilac in here, similar to the veg, right? Lilac vegetal. There's lilac in here. There's violet in here. There is iris in here. There's all sorts of stuff. There is a muguet in here. There is just, it's a floral bouquet, but it's made for men, and you'd have a hard time knowing that nowadays. With modern noses, would not realize this was a man's fragrance. It still technically is, but if you have an open mind and you want to smell like the Victorian era, you know, or and I guess in America that would be the Gilded Age. You want to smell like the Gilded Age, then this is definitely something to look up. Now, 1872, we would see this guy hit the market. Hammam Bouquet by Penhaligons. Composed originally by none other than William Penhaligon himself. And his old shop that he had right there next to the Turkish baths in Jermyn Street. So there used to be these Turkish baths on Jermyn Street. And before he had his own shop, William Penhaligon would go into the baths and do his shaving and hair cutting and such for the people inside the baths. You know, give them their haircut, shave their face in the baths, and then he would create a cologne splash that mimicked the smell of the baths, the hammam smell, which would be primarily rose, sandalwood, and other musky elements. So that's really what Hammam Bouquet is. It is a very musky, rosy, sandalwood fragrance, but it has a very big slug of civet in it, because don't know what it was about the Brits, but in that 19th century era, the Brits loved their civet, they loved their polecat, so a lot of the Victorian era perfumes coming out of Florals and Penhaligons, you name it, they were dealing with a lot of civet. And I love civet personally, but that really kind of puts a warning label on this stuff. And I don't even know if the current Penhaligon still makes Hammam Bouquet. I would think they probably don't, because they're owned by Antonio Puig now, and Puig just turned that whole house into one big joke. Unfortunately, they turned Penhaligons into a joke, but a lot of their barbershop heritage, like their English Fern and a lot of the other fragrances they made from around that period, are just gone. Sadly, they're gone. Replaced by endless flankers of their oud lines and all the weird whimsical caps that are shaped like different things, and you know, the precocious Mr. Peanut and the blithery poop baron of bullshit, whatever fragrance they call it, that whole thing, and I'm just not into that. But you know, once upon a time, you had stuff like this coming out of Penhaligons, and it's a man's floral. It counts, so thus it gets counted because it counts. Now, if you want to move a little further into the 20th century, obviously, you will know that after the advent of the fougere, so basically right around the time Fougere Royale came out, the fixation would move over to lavender. Lavender, 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 lavender. Men love lavender. It's why they wore Jickie when it came out. It's why they eventually moved towards things like Caron pour un homme, which is a big lavender vanilla dose. It's why they liked Canois or Canoe. You know, all those things, very heavy on lavender. Lavender kind of replaced all the other florals for men, and it suddenly became not really cool anymore to have florals in your perfume. So men's fragrances really went more towards the hygienic side, you know, barber shops, the talcum powders, that sort of thing. But we started seeing interest in carnation. And carnation is not a flower you see really exercised a lot in modern perfumery for men or women, really. For a long time, it was because eugenol was restricted, and a lot of the old fragrances that had a lot of carnation in them relied very heavily on eugenol. Lately, that's been rectified, and it's no longer a concern. But because the market has been so long without these fragrances, the taste from the general public is not really there anymore. But I want to say starting in the mid-century, carnation started becoming popular with men again because there was kind of like this whole revival and interest in dandy culture. Okay, you had guys like Liberace with the whole dandy style, and it was just becoming something that guys wanted to explore more. And also a lot of the lounge acts, a lot of the crooners, those guys were very well put together with sartorial outfits and such. So it just kind of one thing led into another. And you start seeing more interest in carnation fragrances, which are very, very floral, obviously. So one of the bigger men's floral fragrances that was around back then would be this little guy from 1962. It's called The Baron. So this was originally released by Evian, the same company that launched White Shoulders originally. And Baron, I think his name was Langenfelder, something like that. He was the founder of the company, and he was also the perfumer. And his wife, whose name was Evelyn, was like the face, the model. Her shoulders were the original White Shoulders, basically. So he took that formula, which also relied pretty heavily on carnation, and he adapted it and changed it into a man's fragrance. So then White Shoulders kind of mutated into the Baron. And the Baron was released originally in 62, but then it was pulled from market and retooled and relaunched in 64, I think, or 5. And the difference was the newer formula had a newer musk that had just come into use amongst perfumers, the Galaxolide musk. And it's a very fruity floral musk, and it really helps enhance the smell of carnation. Whereas the older batches didn't really have that. Wasn't available yet. So it was more like, hey, we can put this stuff in the perfume and it'll really help push, you know. Now, it's not a Galaxolide bomb, okay? This is not Wings by Giorgio, okay? This is not going to smell like Tide or Bounce dryer sheets, but you can tell it has a little bit of that musk in there, and it really pushes out the floral notes quite nicely. I imagine those deep vintage early bottles which lack it still probably smell good, but they're probably more muted. Even if they've survived intact and perfectly without any degradation, they're probably muted. But there's not a whole lot to really say about the Baron other than it's carnation. Do you like carnation? yes, then you'll probably like the Baron. It's really not much more to say. It's going to smell very fresh, very sharp, okay? It's going to hit you in the face. Just someone's taking a whole bouquet of carnations and just whacking you in the head with it. Just bam, carnations. So, if you're not ready for that, you may want to avoid it. But if you like that, a lot of people also mistake carnation for rose if they don't know what a true rose smells like, because they're like, oh, it's a pink flower, it smells flowery, it's a rose. If you really squint like this and stand far enough away from it, you can maybe get a bit of rose. I mean, maybe they share some chemical similarities. I don't know if carnation has the damascenones in it like rose does, or geraniol or whatnot. I don't know the full molecular composition of a geranium or a carnation for that matter, so can't really tell you there. But I mean, yeah, they don't smell like roses to me. But I have a fragrance that mixes them together. If you want rose and carnation, because they do play well, by the way, we're going to leap really far ahead to 1989. Really far ahead. And we will see this little guy right here. This came out in 1989, and it is called Acteur by Azzaro. This is rose and carnation over a isobutylquinoline type of leather base. And it's got a little bit of oak moss in it, not a ton. Even the old batches didn't have a ton. So sorry guys, not oak moss bomb. But it is rose and carnation and leather. And it's really soft and rounded and smooth and a bit jammy. The rose in this is a bit jammy. So if you don't like jammy roses, you won't like this. But I get some spices in here too, some muted spices. It's just really, this is like rose jam and carnation for guys. And I don't know how they thought this was going to sell in 1989. People compare it to Egoist, and I don't think it resembles Egoist one bit, but it is just a creature unto itself. It's almost like, I guess it's a poor man's Iquitos, because Iquitos is so fucking expensive now. But that's a big rose fragrance too, but marketed to men as well. But if you don't want to spend your liver and a kidney to buy a bottle, you know, and you're not someone who's got a big YouTube channel and can vacuum up all of the vintages, you're just a regular guy, then you can buy a bottle of that instead. It'll do you just as well. Now, another really floral fragrance for men, actually, come to think about it, is this guy right here. Came out in 1962 as well. Nope, I'm wrong. 64. This came out in 64, and it is Monsieur Lanvin. I love this stuff. I don't have a ton of it. I've got this and one other small bottle, but it's so hard to get this off too. Yeah, that is something else. But yeah, that is something else. But the Monsieur Lanvin, it's a very, well, it's a pissy rose fragrance, but it's got a lot of other stuff going on too. It's got geranium, it's got some citrus notes, but it's another like dandy floral. It's in the same mindset as the Baron, just a lot dirtier than the Baron. So that's the thing. You have to be really, really wanting to go like back to that Hammam bouquet era, basically, to really appreciate what Monsieur Lanvin is trying to sell to you. And it was not a hugely successful fragrance. I mean, it was successful enough, but it wasn't a hugely successful fragrance for the brand. Now, really, men's florals would come back into vogue more into the 80s, but we will see experimentation weaving in and out of the 70s as well, 60s and 70s. So one good example of another men's floral fragrance that really goes under the radar for a lot of people, and it is Aramis 900, which for all intents and purposes, as I've said in other videos, for all intents and purposes, this is just aromatics elixir for guys. But the thing was, Eau Sauvage, which can also be argued as a men's floral fragrance. Let's go ahead and get this bottle out. Let's include it in the conversation here. This came out in 65 or 66, and the big heavy jasmine changed the world. Suddenly, it was okay for guys to smell like jasmine. Why? Because Dior said so. That's the only reason why. And then suddenly all the other brands decided, hey, we should have our own white floral, light fresh sort of thing that relies heavily on jasmine or rose, because it's becoming acceptable, right, for guys to smell like that, because Eau Sauvage was a very, very, very big fragrance, very successful fragrance. So Lauder famously did not like spending R&D on developing separate men's fragrances. They didn't like doing that. That's why Aramis was basically just Cabochard retooled, which is funny because that was Bernard Chant's formula that he just did that. So then he kept doing that for the house over the years. And when it came time for a competitor to Eau Sauvage, well, he just took Aromatics Elixir and like lightened it up. Added jasmine, took out some of the green notes, made it fresher, added more musk, so there's more civet in this. This is arguably funkier and muskier than Aromatics Elixir, but it is less strong, less green, softer, muskier and softer. And, you know, it was marketed as an herbal cologne, as the camera will focus and let me show you. So it was an herbal cologne. It wasn't a rose fragrance. No, don't let anyone ever tell you that this was a rose fragrance. No, this is an herbal cologne, right? That's what they're going to say. They're wrong, of course, but it's what they're going to say. So, into the 80s. That's when we would see all of the truly dedicated return to older styles. Like, the 80s had its big, mossy, animalic, leathery, powerhouse fragrances, and it also had its big, heavy, aromatic fougères, you know, the first inkling of aquatics and things like that too. But amidst all of that conflicting interest, if you will, there was this one tangent of thought that said, hey, let's go back to the 1920s. Let's go back to the 1930s. Let's go back to the 1800s. And we saw a lot of things like Zeno Davidoff hit the market that were deliberate attempts at recapturing older styles for what was then a new market. The 80s was a new market. So, sort of retro without really being marketed as retro, if that makes sense. And there were a lot of things that came around that were very, very floral. Men's florals. There's actually too many for me to run out this video on, so I'll just try to cherry pick the best ones. But the Zeno is also a fougere, so I don't really want to include it in the conversation. It's floral, yes, but it's a fougere, so I'm going to leave it out. But, you know, it could very well be in this video if we weren't going to exclude fougères from the conversation, at least for right now. I can do a floral fougere video later if you guys really want one. I can do one. But so we had stuff like this come out, and well, Trophy Lancôme came out right at the beginning of the 80s. Big white floral fragrance. That one also counts. Don't have a bottle of that to show you, unfortunately, but it counts. But we also had Water Strike Again in 85. And another big floral green chypre fragrance, Lauder for Men. Some folks call this a fougere, but I do not. I do not consider this a fougere. Not by any means. But some of the biggest ones that flew right under people's noses. You know, people were not even aware that they were wearing floral fragrances. Right towards the end of the decade, I'd say. But we had stuff coming out that was very floral for men. Stuff like let me find it. Yeah, here we go. This Tenere by Paco Rabanne. Very floral fragrance. Rose and sandalwood. Once again, a return to that Victorian era style dandy smell. There's quite a bit of white florals in Koros too. If you really want to drill down into it, Koros has a lot of white florals. Quite a bit. Then we would see stuff in the 90s come around. Givenchy would have Incense in 94, I believe, or 93. But before that, before Incense, we would see a couple other fragrances. One of my favorites is Globe by Rochas in 1990. Big, heavy, white floral chypre fragrance. This has got everything Incense has, but more. See, Incense came after this. This came before Incense. And this has got castoreum. This has got balsam fir. This has got all kinds of great aromatics going on. Still has the white florals. Still has the muguet. Still has all that lovely stuff. But just a much bigger, beefier fragrance. And Jean-Claude Elena, one of the earlier fragrances for him, before he established his later style with Cartier and Aramis. Then in a similar stripe, we have stuff like Cycle by Otto Kern, another 1990 fragrance. Another big white floral fragrance as well. This one plays more, I feel like this one plays more with geranium than it does with, necessarily with muguet. And then, of course, 1881 by Nino Cerruti, a very big white floral fragrance for men. And Rose, Jasmine once again. Okay, this one is a very tart, sharp, dry white floral fragrance. Very fresh, very clean. Very interesting. Very floral. There's no ifs, ands, or buts with that one. Then, of course, one that gets ignored by a lot of people because it's a brand that doesn't have a lot of brand cachet, but we have Claiborne for Men. Big cyclamen fragrance. Men's cyclamen fragrance. Built around ozonic accords. Made very fresh. Not quite aquatic. Now, fast forward into the 2000s, and as you know, Iris. Iris would become a really big floral note for men. Are they not men's florals? See, there we go. I can use modern examples, okay? Is not something like this a men's floral? Is it not? You know? Is not the original Dior Homme? Is this not a men's floral fragrance? You could call it gourmand if you want because of the cocoa. Okay, I get that. Cedarwood. But it is a floral fragrance. Then here we go, another one. People tend to overlook this one as a men's floral fragrance. Another Prada fragrance too. But Prada Amber Pour Homme. Very floral, okay? It came out in 2006. Again, Neroli and Iris in this. So, Orange Blossom, floral. Iris, also floral. very powdery, labdanum, vanilla, okay, cardamom. So, like a nice hotel soap, but exceedingly floral, okay? Men's floral. So, those are all much more modern examples. Then, hey, Cartier Declaration d'un Soir came out in 2012. Rose fragrance. Rose fragrance for men. And probably the most recent fragrances in this whole collection, the newest ones, Moschino Toy Boy, another musky green rose fragrance. We're continuing to harp on the legacy of basically Hammam Bouquet, although Toy Boy is nowhere near as robust as Hammam Bouquet is, let me tell you that right here. And here we go, okay? L'Homme à la Rose by Maison Francis Kurkdjian. Very expensive fragrance. Very rose fragrance. Rose and grapefruit. So, I think I have sufficiently answered your question. Can men wear floral fragrances? Yes, they can. Do they have to wear their girlfriend's, their wives', or their mother's bottle of white diamonds? Or, whatever in that same train of thought? No, they do not. I love white diamonds, though. I think it smells great. It also smells good on the guy. But my point is, yes, they very much can and do, whether they realize it or not, they can and do wear florals all the time. Do you have to go and wear something like this? No, you don't. You shouldn't be afraid to either, because at the end of the day, something like Histoire d'Amour is much closer to a bottle of Prada L'Homme than you realize. Much closer. Don't let the marketing and packaging and all that stuff fool you. Okay. You can pull off a bottle of Dior Homme. You can pull off a bottle of this too. Or white diamonds, like I said. Especially if you like jasmine. Okay, guys. It's been the Unlist. My video on men's florals. Hopefully it answers your question. And